Hi everyone, I'm Marie Dorini. I'm the Paris director of the Columbia Institute for Ideas and Imagination. As you know, the Institute is a fellowship where scholars and artists live in work and conversation for an academic year. And every cohort comes with its lot of great ideas for improving Reed Hall. We've had demands for implementing a daycare for small children, musings about building a swimming pool on the roof of this building. We've been urged to buy blankets. We've done that. Bolsters for those who like to sit on the floor. We also did that. And on day one of the 2024-25 fellowship last September, as the fellows went around the table giving flash presentations of their projects, once Guadalupe had spoken, they all wanted a rage room. All she had said was, "I'm writing a book about anger." Maybe you're all here because you too want a rage room, or you have questions, or you just want to hear one of the most talented, prolific, and original Latin American writers working today. Guadalupe grew up between Mexico and France. She obtained a PhD in linguistics from the EHESS. And those of us who've read The Body Where I Was Born, you know that she began writing when she was a very little girl. Since then, she's published several novels and collections of stories to wide acclaim, all translated in over 20 languages, and has won several prestigious distinctions, including the Heralde Prize for her novel After the Winter. And in 2007, she was on the Bogota 39 list of most promising young writers from Latin America. Guadalupe is drawn to situations that provoke fascination and repulsion, resistance and resignation, tenderness and cruelty, and she's interested in the tension between our emotions and our bodies. Enter rage. So we haven't invested in a punching ball yet, but we know that great literature can be an even more effective tool, and with that, I'll turn it to Guadalupe.
Thank you, Marie, for this generous presentation and for everything, actually. Of course, I want to thank the Institute for Ideas and Imaginations. I want to thank Sari and Meredith and Marie again for all the help, the friendship, the support they've been giving to me this year. And to all my fellows who are really, really nice. And I'm so glad to be here with you guys. I would like to share now a few thoughts about my previous work. From my first novel, El Huésped, to my most recent, Stillborn, one of my intentions has been to question preconceived notions of normal and abnormal, concepts in which I don't believe, to dismantle them, and to invite the readers to reflect upon it. For example, when I began my career at the start of this century, the prevailing idea of beauty was far more uniform and conventional than it is today. At least in the Spanish-speaking world, openly discussing the human body was highly unusual and even frowned upon, especially for women. Unconventional bodies were discriminated against, and concepts like body positivity did not exist yet. At that time, it was uncommon to discuss dissident bodies or to celebrate unconventional beauty, as I did in El Huésped, Pessoar, and The Body Where I Was Born, whose characters are often marginalized individuals or people with distinctive physical or psychological traits. For me, these characters were not just interesting, but also beautiful in their uniqueness. After the Winter delves into the lives of two migrants, one a Mexican in Paris and the other a Cuban in New York, who experienced the profound loneliness of such cities, but also the friendships that arise in extreme circumstances, like plants growing on a dry and windswept cliff. Stillborn, my most recent novel, also explores themes of non-conforming bodies, First and foremost, Inés's body, affected by a severe neurological disability, and her parents struggled to accept and relate naturally to her, to find out who their daughter really is, beyond the preconceived ideas that they have about her. It also examines the experiences of women who choose not to become mothers, a group I believe is underrepresented in literature. So, in most of my books, I have sought to explore subjects that people often avoid or hesitate to address. The quote you are seeing now is the epigraph of my first novel, but it could work for any of my books. Songez qu'il s'agit de se sauver tout entier, avec ses manies, avec ses cales, avec tout ce qu'un homme peut avoir d'inconsistant, de contradictoire, d'absurde. C'est tout cela qu'il faut amener au jour, le fou que nous sommes. Let's move to the present. Unless they're really sick, all humans experience all emotions. To pretend the contrary is to ignore our nature. In our society, when in the physical presence of others, we are expected to be happy all the time, or at least to pretend to be. We accept sadness and even fear in others, but we want angry people to stay away. We cannot tolerate anger, even when the angry person is a friend or someone we love, and we are not the target of their rage. Angry people scare us. We perceive them as threats, as if their emotion was something dangerous and uncontrollable, like a nuclear power plant on the brink of explosion. Expressing anger is now considered abnormal, and those who do so are met with harsh judgment. Of all emotions, anger has become the most forbidden. That is precisely why I'm interested in it. Okay, now I want to ask you something. Please recall a moment in which you were very angry. Perhaps you don't need to go very far in the past. Try to recall the reasons. How did you feel at that time? How did you feel afterwards, when you regain a sense of calm? Were you sad? Were you ashamed? I think you will agree with me if I say that anger is a kind of suffering. No one says, this morning I felt so well because I got really angry. When it is too strong, we feel the urge to get rid of it, the way we throw out rotten food. But no one shows us how to do it. The only thing we are told to do is to swallow the poison silently. We often associate anger with violence and hatred, but they are not necessarily synonymous. According to the traditional Chinese medicine, the liver is responsible for the smooth flow of qi or vital energy throughout the body. When the liver qi becomes stagnant or blocked, it can result in a range of symptoms including irritability, frustration, resentment, and even depression. In Ayurveda, the traditional medicine of India, anger is seen as an imbalance of the fire element, pitta, within a person. In the ancient Greek theory of the four humors, popularized by Galen, as integrated patterns of physiology and physiognomy, the choleric temperament was due to an excess of yellow bile, corresponding to fire, or more precisely, excessive heat. The term choleric comes from kolos, one of the ancient Greek words for anger. Psychoanalytic theories linked anger to repressed libido or sexual energy, in Freud's view, and to vital energy in Jung's. Repressing anger for too long, they say, can also lead to inhibit our creativity, to sexual impotence, or even to sexual aggression. The longer anger is repressed, the more powerful its eventual explosion. In most cultures, this emotion is as inevitable that even the gods get angry and also furious from time to time. Throughout history, natural disasters have been attributed to the wrath of the gods. The flooding of China's Yellow River was blamed on the anger of the river god Hopo. Aegir, the Norse god of the sea, was said to steer storms in his rage. In Hindu mythology, Shiva was born from Brahma's anger. Thor wields a lightning spear, as does Chak, the Mayan rain god. Chango, the Yoruba god of thunder and war, remains venerated in Afro-Caribbean and Brazilian religions, as well as in Cuban Santeria. And every time someone has a fit of rage, Shango is supposed to have taken hold of them. In the Bible, God's anger is depicted as fierce and relentless. The flood, the plagues of Egypt, and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah all serve as examples of divine wrath. In ancient Greece, Ares was the god of war. The Greeks were ambivalent towards him. He used to embody the physical valor necessary for success in war, and in everything actually. Ares was also called Carpodotes, the giver of fruits, and was considered one of the gods associated with agriculture, because for a seed to sprout, it must break open, and for a tree to emerge, it requires an immense impulse. But Ares also personifies sheer brutality and bloodlust. In the Iliad, Ares and Aphrodite had at some point an illicit love affair. Aphrodite was married. And the child born of this union, the union of two opposites, is no one other than harmony. Statues of Ares in chains are described in the instructions given by an oracle of the late Hellenistic era to the cities of Cilicia and Lycia. Each was told to set up a statue of a bloody man slaying Ares and provided with an annual festival in which it was ritually bound with iron shackles, put on trial, and offered sacrifice. Menin, or anger, is the opening word of the Iliad. Menin aeida thea, which in English would be rage, goddess, sing the rage of Achilles. The wrath of Achilles, its causes and its manifestations, is the subject of the Iliad. Although the Trojan War as a whole figures prominently in the work, this larger conflict ultimately provides the text with background rather than subject matter. It scrutinizes the origins and the end of this wrath, thus narrowing the scope of the poem from a larger conflict between warring peoples to a smaller one between warring individuals. Okay. In Roman mythology, Mars is the god of warriors, youth, and violence, a god of primary importance as the father of Romulus and Remus. He was the founder and protector of the city. He is identified with Ares, but Mars' character and dignity differ fundamentally from those of his counterpart. Mars was a more disciplined and restrained deity and was so revered that his name survives in a planet, a month of the year, and even a day of the week in French, Spanish, and other Romance languages. Tuesday in Spanish is associated with misfortune. En martes, ni te cases, ni te embarques. On Tuesday, don't get married and don't embark. So for ancient Greeks and Romans, the gods were responsible for human passions. They could make us fall in love, succumb to lust, or be consumed by rage. And therefore, passions were sacred. To keep the gods pleased or to restrain them, humans engage in various practices, from worship to ritualistic bindings. These acts of acknowledging the gods' existence, that is to say, acknowledging the force of the emotions they produced, the very notion of resisting the influence through sheer willpower would have been considered foolish and also a sort of blasphemy. Pagan gods do not punish for misbehaving, but for ignoring them. Returning to the idea of chaining arrows, which is what we try to do nowadays, right? Is it really worth it? In the History of Manners, Norbert Elias describes how, from the Middle Ages onward, collective expressions of anger and violence, from mask festivals to public executions attended by everyone, really everyone, were gradually eradicated. During the Middle Ages, says psychoanalyst Roland Jacquard, Christian ritual of confession took place in an open space. The priest would ask the community, "Who has stolen or murdered this week?" And several would raise their hands in front of everyone. Jacquard explains in L'Exil intérieur that with the invention of the confessional, you know, the little wooden box, by the end of the 16th century, people went gradually from a communal expression of emotion to a private one, where no one but the priest would know people's sins. Humans started to keep their emotions to themselves. They stopped knowing what others did and felt, which increased the feelings of isolation and shame. We became exiles within ourselves. And this condition, says Jacquard, can only lead to illness, if not to uncontrollable outbursts of violence, like the Las Vegas shooting in the US, where a man fired more than 1,000 rounds at a crowd, killing 60 people and wounding at least 413. A few months before his death, Fritz Zorn wrote Mars, an autobiographical novel. This is the beginning of it. I am young, I am rich and educated, and I'm unhappy, neurotic, and alone. I come from one of the very best families on the east shore of Lake Zurich, the shore that people call the Golden Coast. My upbringing has been middle class, and I have been a model of good behavior all my life. And of course, I have cancer. That follows logically enough from what I have just said about myself. Zorn saw his cancer as a metaphor for a life constrained by societal expectations, where dissent, protest, and anger were forbidden. At the end of his life, he gives himself at last the possibility of rebelling against the corset imposed by his parents and his environment. He also says, utterly dominated by comme il faut themselves, my parents raised me so comme il faut that I'm dying of comme il faut. But a society whose children die from completely internalizing the values of that society is doomed. When Fritz Angst, that was his real name, Angst means fear in German, chose Fritz Zorn as his literary pseudonym, Zorn means rage, and decided to name Mars the hero and narrator of his story, he transformed fear into anger. In 1984, Orwell's formerly dystopian novel that has become increasingly realistic, 2 Minutes Hate was a mandated ritual in which people collectively screamed to release their repressed frustration and hatred. The horrible thing about the 2 Minutes Hate, says the narrator, was not that one was obliged to act a part, but on the contrary, that it was impossible to avoid joining in. Ultimately, everyone surrendered to the collective impulse, basically because they had no other space to express it. In a similar way, our anger has been confined to a very reduced amount of spaces. What are they? Football is one. Either at the stadium, the pub, or their homes, during a football match, the fans are allowed to scream and to insult. They can push people, they can sing songs that are the opposite of politically correctness. Men can cry like babies, no matter how strong and ingrained the mandate of masculinity may be in them. Another free zone, I would say wild zone, for anger is the social media. Especially Twitter, where everyone shouts to each other with no argumentation or nuance, where everyone is outraged and it's the only thing that matters. It is said that more than any other, the angry face emoji is the one that attracts our attention in many of the social platforms. You can also book a rage room, a place where you can go on your own to scream and break all kinds of things. Or you can have a piñata at your birthday party and choose it carefully. Is it possible to give our anger a use? In Tibetan Buddhism, each Buddha represents a type of energy. Manjushri, for example, represents the power of intelligence and study. Vajrasattva, the one you're seeing here, purification and cleanliness. Tara, fearless action. All of them are said to feel unconditional love for all beings without exception. However, this same compassion can manifest itself as anger when it is convenient and necessary, and therefore each of them, each Buddha, has an angry aspect. But then, of course, Buddhas are by nature illuminated people. Theirs is not a blind or irrational anger, but a conscious anger, always with positive purpose. Before humans learned to control fire, they were very much scared of it. Anger is a force we have yet to master. Tibetan Buddhism also assures that every emotion, no matter how negative, can be transformed, and that the energy of anger, when properly released, transforms into mental clarity and wisdom. Dancing is another great way to give it space. I think we all should learn to perform the Maori haka. I love that. I really would like it. We should have it at the workshop. To write this book, I have interviewed different people, among them an environmental activist and a social worker, a school teacher, a psychologist, and an astrologer. They all agree that anger can be the engine that drives very positive things, such as environmental campaigns, feminist protests, and of course, revolutions. Listening to them has convinced me of this. If we were taught from childhood to recognize, coexist, and manage our anger instead of repressing it, not only our lives, but the world would be different. This powerful energy could be used in a conscious way to destroy what no longer works, but also to invent new things and to create beauty. Thank you.